Pellington High School, a basketball game is in full swing. During a timeout, the coach instructs his star players, Mason, also known as Horse, and Dean, on how to secure the win. When the game resumes, Mason scores several crucial points for his team. Suddenly, he feels as though someone is watching him. Dean calls out his name, snapping Mason out of the strange trance. With the clock ticking down, the team looks to Mason to take the final game-winning shot. As he shoots, he sees the burned man from before reaching out toward him. The ball swishes through the net. The crowd erupts in cheers and the burned man vanishes. Moments later, Mason rushes to his locker, goosebumps prickling his skin as he pulls it open. He takes out the ancient urn. The burned man appears again, moving toward him. Panicking, Mason grabs a kettlebell and smashes the urn. The footsteps stop. Shortly afterward, his teammates gather around to congratulate him on the winning shot. Later, Mason steps into the shower. What begins as a peaceful moment quickly turns into horror. This time, the figure sets him ablaze. Dean watches in shock as his best friend burns to the ground. 6 months later, Chris moves to the town of Pellington from Chicago after losing her father in a tragic car accident. So, she comes to live with her uncle and her cousin Rel. On the drive into town, she notices a looming steel factory where Rel works on weekends, and a church nearby. About an hour later, she arrives at the house. Rel greets her enthusiastically, briefly startling her. He offers to help unpack, and when he spots her vinyl records, he teases her for being old-fashioned. Soon after, he reminds Chris to get ready for her first day at Pellington High School. At school, Rel grabs his Revenger comics as students stare at Chris. Rel begins pointing out the popular cliques, starting with Grace. However, Chris's attention shifts to Grace's quiet friend, whom Rel introduces as Ellie. Curious, Chris asks who Horse is. Rel tells her it was Mason's nickname, a student who recently died from the flu. Just then, Mason's friends, Dean and Tanner, approach Chris and tells her she can't use the locker. She argues that it's the one assigned to her. Grace steps in, telling Dean not to cause a scene. Trying to impress Grace, Rel compliments her hair. She smiles and asks about Chris, and he explains that she's his cousin. Dean smirks and asks if Chris is the new girl. Then he claims he heard a rumor that she recently got out of rehab, and even killed her father. Fed up, Chris kicks him between the legs. Unfortunately, their history teacher, Mr. Craven, catches the commotion and gives all 4 of them detention. Ellie insists that Chris did nothing wrong. Craven says he saw everything, and assigns Ellie detention as well for lying. Moments later, the bell rings. Ellie apologizes for Dean's behavior and offers to help, but Chris declines. Chris then notices an ancient-looking urn inside her locker. Curious, she takes it out and opens it, discovering a skull-carved whistle inside. She lifts it to her lips and tries to blow into it. But just then, she hears the bell ring again. She makes her way to detention. Dean snickers at the use of her full name. As Chris sets her bag down, the whistle slips out and clatters onto the table. Dean immediately asks Mr. Craven whether the school allows drug pipes on campus. Chris quickly clarifies that it isn't a pipe. Craven gestures for her to bring it to him, and she explains that she found it in her locker. Examining the object closely, Craven notes that the carvings resemble early Mayan script, or possibly Olmec. He attempts to translate it, explaining that Kaba means to call out to something. Then he comes across another word, Pixon, which he doesn't recognize. Grace quickly types it into her laptop and announces that it translates to summon the dead. When Chris reaches for the whistle, Craven quickly pulls it away, saying he'll keep it since it may have historical value. He dismisses detention early. Soon after, Grace invites everyone to her house for a pool party. Noticing the way Rel keeps staring at Grace, she playfully asks if he has a crush on her. Rel nods. Meanwhile, Craven discovers that the whistle could be worth around $35,000. Wanting to check its condition, he blows the whistle. Satisfied that it works, he marks it as being in good condition. Outside the school, Rel tells Chris that Dean had no right to bring up her father. Chris shrugs it off, saying it's fine. A moment later, Rel realizes he left his comic book in the classroom and runs back to retrieve it. He spots Mr. Craven stepping out of the room. Once the coast is cleared, Rel sneaks inside, grabs his comic, and notices the teacher's laptop still open. Outside, a young man approaches Chris and introduces himself as Noah, a youth pastor from St. Mark's Church down the road. He asks if she believes in God. Chris tells him she's not really into religion. Noah then invites her to visit his church to meet new people and have a good time. He pulls out drugs, offering them as a welcome gift. Rel quickly steps in, telling Noah to back away from her. Chris firmly tells Noah to stop. He calmly replies that God has a purpose for everyone and claims he's only helping those in need. He adds that one of them overdosed a year ago. That night, Craven browses vacation packages online. However, when he opens the urn to check the whistle, he realizes it is gone. Craven assumes the janitor, Charlie, might know something about the missing whistle, so he calls out for him. As he steps into the hallway, he notices a pale, sickly-looking man standing nearby. Craven tells him the school is closed and that he's trespassing. Suddenly, Charlie appears behind Craven, startling him. Still shaken, Craven mutters that he needs to go lie down for a while. When Craven looks confused, Charlie makes a smoking gesture. Craven returns to his classroom, only to find the sickly man waiting for him inside. Suddenly, Craven begins coughing violently as his lungs start to fail him. Within seconds, he collapses and dies. Meanwhile, Rel and Chris arrive at Grace's house for the pool party. Then Rel shows everyone the whistle. Dean jokingly suggests calling his grandfather, but Grace quickly points out that his grandpa isn't dead yet. She then notices her little brother, Timmy, hovering nearby and firmly tells him to go back to his room. Examining the whistle, Grace admires its intricate design and calls it beautiful. Ellie, who works part-time at the ER, quietly remarks that death is anything but beautiful. Dean dares his girlfriend to blow the whistle. Chris makes it clear she wants no part in summoning anything related to death. Ellie gently tells her she doesn't have to go. Finally, Grace lifts the whistle and blows into it. After a few tense seconds, Dean suddenly asks if anyone else can hear that. Chris says her goodbyes and starts to leave, but Ellie stops her and invites her to the local harvest festival the next day. Chris hesitates for a moment, then smiles. Just then, Rel rushes out and tosses Ellie her diabetic insulin pouch. Ellie thanks him, then explains to Chris that she's late for her hospital shift. Before leaving, she asks Chris to text her about the festival and tells her to get her number from Rel. Then, Chris asks Rel if Ellie is straight. Rel shrugs and admits he doesn't know. Later that night, Chris lies on her bed, typing out a text to Ellie. She deletes it, rewrites it, deletes it again. As she stares at her phone, she suddenly feels like someone is watching her. She looks toward the window and freezes. The door suddenly swings open without a knock, and Rel barges in, startling her. Then, she notices in horror that she accidentally sent the last text she was drafting. She panics, but Rel tells her to calm down, and sends Ellie a reply himself. Meanwhile, by the pool, Grace is working on her homework when she begins to hear faint breathing nearby. Assuming it's her younger brother, she ignores it until the sound continues. Feeling uneasy, she steps out of the pool to investigate. She suddenly hears someone running behind her and turns around. Just then, a hand gently touches her cheek. She spins around and sees Timmy standing there. He calmly tells her that their mother wants to speak with her. The next morning, Rel and Chris join the others at the school assembly. Ellie quietly tells them that Mr. Craven died the previous night because he had stage 4 lung cancer, and doctors said it was a miracle he had even been on his feet the day before. Ellie then notices a hooded figure several seats ahead of her, seemingly having a seizure. The figure slowly turns toward her and appears to mouth her name. Grace hands the whistle back to Chris, saying she doesn't want it anymore. Chris suggests they should simply return it to Mason's family. So Chris and Ellie head to Mason's house. On the way, Ellie notices Chris's tattoos and asks why she hides them. Chris brushes it off, saying it's personal. Ellie gently asks how she decides what to tattoo in the first place.
You just find something you love and you let its color on.
Chris knocks on the door, and it slowly creaks open. They step inside. Moments later, Mason's grandmother, Ivy, comes downstairs. She mutters that she wants to die in this house, but the bank has informed her it no longer belongs to her. Then, Ivy leads them into a room filled with strange and occult artifacts collected from around the world. She explains that she gathers them as memento mori, reminders of mortality. Chris asks if the whistle belongs to her collection, explaining that she found it in Mason's locker. Ivy shakes her head and says she didn't find the whistle. The whistle found her, just as it found her daughter, and her grandson. Chris asks what the whistle actually does. Ivy explains that it is called Inchoka, meaning the cry. It is a stolen relic, taken from a plundered people long ago. Chris mentions that they translated the carving as, summon the dead. Ivy corrects her gently, summon your death. She explains that the moment a person is born, their death is born alongside them. From that day forward, it searches for them. If someone is destined to die at 90, death will take 90 years to find them. But if they hear the scream of the whistle, the call of Inchoka guides death straight to them, far sooner than fate intended. Chris, shaken, asks what death looks like. Like you, Ivy replies. It becomes what you would have been in your final breath. Chris swallows hard and asks, what happens if someone doesn't want to die? Ivy simply tells her, then you should never have been born. Outside. Ellie tells Chris that Ivy is heavily medicated and recently lost Mason, noting that grief can distort reality. As a future doctor, she adds that there is no scientific basis for what Ivy is saying. Chris nods, then asks Ellie if she thinks Mr. Craven might have used the whistle, just like Mason did.
Maybe. Their files will be at the hospital I work at.
Later, inside the hospital's medical records room, Ellie confesses that something about Mason's death never made sense to her. He supposedly caught fire inside a shower cubicle, and the school blamed it on a gas leak, but his body was so badly burned that dental records had to be used to identify him. Suddenly, a doctor enters the room, and the two girls scramble to hide behind a shelf. Chris grabs Mason's dental record, then asks how old he was when he died. 17, Ellie replies. Chris scans the coroner's report and notices that the bone density and structural analysis suggests someone in their late 40s. Chris repeats Ivy's words. You will become what you would have been in your last breath. Ellie pieces it together. Mason was meant to die in his late 40s, but because of the whistle, his death found him early. The same must have happened to Craven, who was destined to die from lung cancer eventually. Realizing the danger, They rush out to warn the others. At the Harvest Festival, Rel spots Noah discreetly handing something to Grace. He immediately steps in, telling her she doesn't need that trash. It's just weed, Grace replies casually. Rel urges her to toss it and come with him so he can win a teddy bear for her at one of the stalls. But Grace gently turns him down, telling him he'll make someone much better than her very happy someday. Grace walks over to Dean and proposes a game. She'll enter the hay bale maze, and he has to wait 2 minutes before searching for her, if he finds her before she rings the bell at the center. He wins! Meanwhile, Chris and Ellie arrive at the festival. Chris tries calling Rel, but he doesn't answer. Before they can look for him, Noah shows up again, trying to sell drugs. Chris watches, impressed. Then Noah pulls out his knife, claiming he wasn't trying to hurt anyone. Chris grabs the knife and demands to know about the boy he killed with his drugs. Noah insists he has no idea what she's talking about. Chris cuts his nose, leaving a gash. Inside the maze, Grace runs, laughing nervously as haunted figures jump out to scare her. Close behind her, Dean and his friend enter after the countdown. As Grace moves deeper into the maze, she hears someone calling her name. At first, she assumes it's Dean. But when she turns a corner, she sees an elderly woman standing ahead, staring at her. The woman softly calls her name again. Grace runs. Outside the maze, Chris asks Rel where the rest of the group is.
The maze, I guess?
After winning a teddy bear, Rel joins them at the maze entrance, and the three of them hurry in. Grace frantically calls Dean, whispering that a creepy old woman is following her. Dean laughs, telling her it's part of the haunted attraction, but Grace's fear intensifies. Grace drops her phone and screams. Desperate, she grabs a nearby shovel and swings it at the old woman's head. The impact knocks the woman sideways, but Grace also falls hard. Groaning, Grace pushes herself back up. She touches her temple and pulls her hand away, seeing blood, just like the old woman she struck. Moments later, the old woman gets up again and Grace runs. Somewhere deeper in the maze, Dean calls out her name repeatedly, but there's no response. Grace runs through the maze, desperately calling out for Dean. She spots a narrow gap in the hay bales and squeezes through it. When she turns around, the old woman is right behind her. The figure lunges and grabs her, but Grace struggles free and stumbles ahead. Finally, Grace spots the bell at the center of the maze and drags herself toward it. Summoning the last of her strength, Grace rings the bell. The loud clang echoes through the maze. Dean, Chris, Ellie, and Rel rush toward the sound. Later, Dean says the old woman couldn't be Grace, but Chris looks at him steadily and explains that the old woman was indeed Grace, and she was meant to die of old age. She's 18, Dean snaps. Ellie reminds him that when Grace blew the death whistle, they were all there. It summoned their deaths.
I've been walking through shadows, no light on my side.
Dean scoffs, refusing to believe any of it. He says he's going home and will wait for Grace to call him. Then Dean blames Chris, insisting that all the strange events started happening the moment she arrived in town. Rel steps in, pointing out that Dean was the one who dared Grace to blow the whistle.
Your fault she's dead!
Dean shoves Rel to the ground and coldly tells him that someone like him could never end up with a girl like Grace. Later that night, Dean locks himself in his room. He suddenly notices a bloodied figure standing in the corner. Panicked, he switches on the light, and the figure vanishes. His father knocks on the door. Dean claims he just had a nightmare, but his father isn't convinced. He asks him if he has been drinking again and warns him not to drink and drive, saying it could very well be the death of him. At Rel's house, Chris asks Ellie how he's holding up. Ellie explains that Grace was his childhood crush, and that he's heartbroken. After a heavy silence, Chris confesses something she's never told anyone. A year ago, she overdosed. Her father found her unconscious and rushed her to the hospital. On the way, a truck crashed into their car. He died. She survived. Ellie softly apologizes. Chris says she keeps listening to her father's music because it makes her feel close to him. Then Chris admits she sometimes wishes she had died instead of her father. Ellie leans in and kisses her. Chris pulls back, surprised, and laughs nervously, saying she's not as smart or put together as Ellie. She smiles and replies, "But you're Chrysanthemum." This time, Chris kisses her back. Out on the terrace, Rel suddenly has a vision of himself being crushed by machinery inside the steel factory. The next morning, the trio visits Ivy, who is now on her deathbed. Chris tells her that the whistle has claimed the life of one of their friends and asks what it wants. Ivy explains that ancient civilizations once offered souls to satisfy their gods of death, and that Inchoka has been collecting them for thousands of years. Ellie asks how they can stop it. Ivy replies that death is unstoppable, and that once it is summoned, it will not relent. But she reveals that there is one way to alter its course. When death is near, they must mark their blood on someone else, offering a new sacrifice to Inchoka. Suddenly, Chris sees her own death standing nearby. With her final breath, Ivy whispers that death is not a choice, but living is. Rel considers the idea of sacrifice. Chris and Ellie immediately reject it. Chris admits she saw her death. It looked like she would overdose in the future. Desperate, Rel tries once more to convince them, but when they refuse again, he storms out. Meanwhile, Dean watches a news report about the Pellington Harvest Festival tragedy. Authorities have recovered the body of an unidentified elderly woman. He switches off the television, His bedroom door creaks open. He sees the same bloodied figure again. His father calls from outside, asking if he's okay. Dean doesn't answer. Instead, he barricades the door, terrified the creature will enter. His parents pound on the door, demanding he open it. The figure touches him. In an instant, Dean's body twists violently, like he's caught in a high-speed crash. His parents finally break down the door and scream at the horrific sight. Later, Chris and Ellie reach Rel's house, but he's nowhere to be found. So they decide to head to the steel mill where he works. At the same time, Rel storms into the church with a gun. He orders Noah to come with him. As the church bell rings, Rel gets distracted for a split second. Noah grabs the gun and tries to fire, but the magazine is empty. Rel takes advantage of the moment and knocks him unconscious. At the steel mill, Rel ties Noah to a chair. He tells him this is where he is fated to die, so this is where Noah will die. Rel slices his palm, preparing to mark Noah with his blood. Noah asks in panic if this is some kind of black magic. Goosebumps run down Rel's spine. He knows his death is near. Just as he moves to mark Noah with his blood, Chris and Ellie rush in, shouting for him to stop. Rel, shaking and desperate, argues how someone like Noah, a murderous scumbag, gets to live while they die. In the end, Rel can't bring himself to go through with it. He weakly whispers, "I guess everyone has to die once." Something in that sentence clicks for Chris. She tells them she's found a way out. Before she can explain, Rel's hands are caught and shredded by an unseen machinery, and in seconds, he is gone. Chris sobs as Ellie comforts her. Then with fierce determination, Chris vows that she won't let death take Ellie. Chris then tells her plan. They have to trick death into thinking they're dead, but only briefly. Chris sees the insulin Ellie keeps for her diabetes and asks if it is enough to stop the heart for a few minutes. She tells Chris that insulin alone will not cause cardiac arrest. Then she pauses and says she has another idea. Chris asks Ellie to bring the supplies inside when she is finished. Chris goes inside and comes face to face with death. Moments later, Ellie enters and prepares the medicine. While Chris prepares the ice bath and readies the defibrillator, Chris offers to inject Ellie first, but Ellie refuses, saying she needs to make sure she lives. Within seconds, Chris collapses. Ellie gently lowers her into ice water, hoping to preserve her brain while stopping her heart long enough to trick the death. Meanwhile, Noah regains consciousness. He grabs the gun and staggers outside. Ellie begins resuscitation. She checks for a pulse. Nothing. She starts compressions. Still nothing. Chris remains motionless. Ellie hears the shutter screech as Noah tries to force it open. Her hands shake, but she refuses to stop. Then Ellie sees it. Her own death standing behind her, staring at her. At the same moment, Chris comes face to face with her own death. They struggle. The figure overpowers her. Then Chris remembers Ivy's words. She focuses on Ellie's voice, faint but persistent, calling her name. Back in the real world, Noah storms in and fires at Ellie. The shot grazes her, and she cries out, but she doesn't stop resuscitating Chris. Chris eventually comes back to life and notices Ellie's death. Noah raises the gun again, ranting that God has a plan for everyone, that he's only helping those in need, and that Chris is beyond redemption. Then he declares that he is washed in the lamb's blood. Suddenly he notices a bloated, grotesque figure standing before him. Terrified, he fires at it wildly, then he dies. 3 months later, Ellie and Chris are officially dating, stronger after everything they endured. Meanwhile, a freshman named Asha opens her locker and discovers an ancient urn inside. Later that day, during the school assembly, Asha is introduced as the new student who will perform the national anthem on her violin. She steps up to the